we are progressing towards new series that are unlocking a lot of new Easter eggs, a lot of new things that are thrilling us. It was quite important for me that at this point in time I start talking about an upcoming series on Disney Plus, which is entitled Secret Invasion. Secret Invasion is a very important storyline. I'm going to be basically taking the opportunity to share with you what I know about the source material from which these storylines are inspired. We are now watching more superhero content than ever before. I can't recall a moment in time where we were being entertained globally, and especially for a guy like me who was born and raised in Saudi Arabia, to be entertained with so much superhero content, whether in the form of TV series, web series, movies, animated series, animated features, the list goes on and on. This thing is not just restricted to one company. Both powerhouses, namely Marvel and DC, are basically, unleashing one production after another. Some of them are meeting our expectations, others are not meeting our expectations, but that's the way life is. Secret Invasion, for me, it's one of the most important storylines because we need to understand a little bit of a background. In 1998, Marvel Comics, or in 1996-97, somewhere around that, Marvel Comics declared bankruptcy. And when they declared bankruptcy after, filing Chapter 11 and then restructuring the company, two individuals, namely Joe Quesada, who is currently the Chief Creative Officer of Marvel, and Jim Palmiotti, these two guys were hired by Marvel to, give a new boost or redefine a lot of its A-list as well as B-list characters. This resulted in a series we now know as Marvel Knights, one of the best works ever produced in the late 90s, and their legacy continued till 2010. A lot of big names came in. We had Paul Jenkins, we had Mark Miller, we had Brian Michael Bendis, some artists that came in and joined the fray, Alex Maleev, for example. Kevin Smith did a very good comic for Daredevil during that time. The art was done by Joe Quesada and the story was done by Kevin Smith. Now, this build-up of writers and artists was proving to be very successful, not only with the fans but also with the critics. And in that respect, they had a poster child, a superstar, if you will. It doesn't mean that other writers were not as good as him. They were, but his work gained a lot of prominence, especially in the early 2000s. And I'm talking here about Brian Michael Bendis. His idea was that he would develop an 8-year-long arc, building up on an old story from Marvel Comics that was published back in the late 60s by Roy Thomas, illustrated by Neil Adams and John Buscema. It was about the Kree-Skrull War. Now, the Skrulls were introduced in the Marvel Universe by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee in Fantastic Four issue number 3 or issue number 4. I can't recall that correctly. And these were shape-shifting aliens. We have seen them in Captain Marvel movie. We have seen them in the recent WandaVision series is one of the post-credit scenes. And Brian Michael Bendis wanted to create something totally out of the box that would span like almost a decade. And the heart of that story would prove to be Secret Invasion. But before we move into the Secret Invasion, we need to give credit. We need to, recognize and remember a story that was basically the precursor to Secret Invasion. Of course, a lot of other stories came back afterwards. after its immediate publications, because when Secret War happened, it happened roughly around the same time of Avengers Disassembled. Then you had House of M, then you had Civil War, then you had World War Hulk. So many crossovers that took place. But the culmination of that story, or the semi-final, if I can call it, was the Secret Invasion, and then things just ended up in Avengers versus X-Men. And this here is Secret War. This story was written by Brian Michael Bendis, but it was beautifully illustrated by Gabriele Dell'Otto, the Italian artist. This story was really unexpected. The interesting bit about it was that it was inspired by Brian Michael Bendis' neighbor, who had worked in the intelligence community. His identity was kept undisclosed, but based on the stories that he told Brian Michael Bendis, and we need to remember that at that time, in 2004, the world had witnessed 9/11 3 years before that. So there was so much about the preemptive strike that the Bush administration was talking about in those days concerning Iraq, because the Iraq war was about to happen in 2005. And a disaster like 9/11 had struck, and Marvel had done stories about it as well. If you are not aware of it, there are commemorative issues of Spider-Man and many other Marvel superheroes that recognize, that share the grief of 9/11. So Bendis, after hearing a lot of good stories and everything, he realizes that, there is something that can be done that's going to shake the Marvel universe, and this would be something really unprecedented because the last large scale crossover that was planned but was not executed successfully, Acts of Vengeance, where all of the A-list villains, whether it was Loki, Red Skull, Magneto, Kingpin, all of them get together to hit back at the heroes, the people who have been creating trouble for them in the Marvel universe. But unfortunately, fortunately it started out well. Unfortunately, it didn't conclude well. This arc would prove to be different, and it is all thanks to, again, this graphic novel, which is Secret War. This is the hardcover edition. Now, why I want everyone to read this is because this is not something like a spy thriller, to say the least. Yes, it has elements of that, but it has a lot of thrill, a lot of intrigue within the storyline. Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., he discovers something really suspicious, a very disturbing connection with one of the governments in Latveria. Now, in Latveria, Dr. Doom has been overthrown, and it has been replaced by a democratically elected government. And what is happening is that government is passing on very high-tech weaponry to B-list villains, people like the Wizard, people like Scorpion, Matt Gargan, all of these B-list villains. And Nick Fury is now expecting that there is going to be a major strike on US soil, something which is going to be equivalent to 9/11, if not worse. So to preempt that, he assembles a pack of heroes whom he could trust. Now, who are the heroes he trusted? Daredevil, Wolverine, Captain America, Black Widow, Spider-Man, and Luke Cage. Now, he takes them on a mission, and after that, what happens is that the mission gets completed. They return home. There was some kind of a glitch within that, but still, overall, they were able to complete the mission. But upon getting exposed to the Latvian government, which is being run by Lucia von Bardas, the revenge strike was inevitable. Now, one thing that Nick Fury did, Nick Fury is the master, he's the spy master, and he uses technology to his advantage wherever he can. So he, upon returning to the US, mind wiped each and every hero. And the story begins mysteriously when Luke Cage gets attacked in Harlem. And the heroes they come across, because the attack was huge, all of these B-list villains, they come out with this attack which Nick Fury was fearing. And everybody is just clueless that how are these guys getting the tech and why are these guys attacking, because there is no connection coming through it. Keep in mind that the Avengers Disassembled storyline happened roughly around the same time. And in that, there is a very important panel that shows Nick Fury where he's saying that this is something not right. There are loose ends, there are loose threads. This story kept the audiences in anticipation of what is to come. People were not able to connect the dots, but they realized that there was something big that was about to happen. And from then came House of M, and everybody thought that this is like the biggest event in Marvel history. Turns out it wasn't the one, even though it was one heck of a storyline. Then you had the Civil War storyline. Tony Stark versus Captain America. The Battle of Ideas, inspired by Patriot Act, a real-life Patriot Act that happened in the United States, that was passed in the US House of Representatives. This story took those points of references and then adapted them into the Marvel Universe. But again, as big as Civil War was, it wasn't it. Then we come across World War Hulk. Now, World War Hulk, it may have been huge in terms of magnitude, because obviously Hulk is returning from planet Hulk, similar to what we had seen a reference in Thor Ragnarok, where he ends up becoming a gladiator fighter. In planet Hulk, from a gladiator fighter, he becomes the ruler of the planet Sakaar. And when he learns and remembers what was done to him by the heroes, because his mind says that the heroes actually wanted to banish him from planet Earth. Yes, to an extent that was correct, but it was because of horrific events that had happened previously, which is why the Illuminati of Marvel Universe, which happens to be Reed Richards, Namor, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Professor Xavier, Black Bolt, all of them decide that for the sake of saving the world, the Hulk needs to be taken off a planet, whereby he regains his consciousness as Bruce Banner. So the Planet Hulk storyline was also seismic, but it wasn't there. Secret Invasion was the story that really brought the fear, the intrigue, the anticipation of that were planted, the seeds of which that were planted in this storyline, to fruition. And I still remember when I was reading Secret Invasion, I am looking at the characters, I'm seeing in the panel Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, Iron Man, and I'm like asking, which one of them is a Skrull? The tagline for that storyline was, who do you trust? I am really hopeful that Disney and Marvel Studios, they do a much better adaptation. Of course, they need to keep it in line with the discourse of the cinematic universe, not the comic book Marvel universe. But it needs to capture that excitement, that suspense, the suspense which we saw in WandaVision, because every episode, it was a suspense. We were, it forced us to think, it forced us to, come up with theories, to explain, to make sense of the events itself. I certainly hope that the same thing happens for Secret Invasion, because this happens to be one of my favorite Marvel crossovers. And I say that even though it was an Avengers-centric storyline, not an X-Men-centric storyline, me being an X-Men fan, the way this story captivated me, the way this story, in a way it gives you deep lessons about life itself, that people are not always what they seem. And you might be spending lives with people who act as your friends or your relatives or your neighbors or your co-workers, and you would always think of them in that they are good individuals. But what they have inside of them against you is something of a surprise. And the Skrulls were basically, they wanted to extract revenge from the heroes, because since the 60s, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, even to a certain extent X-Men, they've all been kicking their butts, if you will. And since the world was still reeling from the effects of War on Terror, Brian Michael Bendis added a tone of religious extremism within the Skrull community, whereby they are waiting for a prophecy to be fulfilled, the conquering of the blue planet. And this is so much relatable, because in our world today we are seeing these messianic tendencies, not just from one community and not just from one geographical sector of the world, but in fact it's just almost everywhere. It's relatable to us in so many of our social interactions, of our daily lives, and it strikes you even deeper. But the starting point that really is the suspense behind it. Predictable stories tend to be boring. If you have watched recently my review of Loki, one of the reasons I didn't enjoy Loki that much was because it was predictable. If you're talking about timelines, and if you read comic books, it's going to be Kang. Secret Invasion was unpredictable, but it could not have been to an extent had it not been for this graphic novel. It was a limited series and it was published from 2004 until 2005. I'm going to be uploading the link from where you can get this Secret War title. Thank you very much for joining in. Have a good day. See you guys. Have a great time. Thank you.